I'm Rachel Madel from Talking with Tech.
And I'm Chris Bouguet from Talking with Tech.
We have a podcast dedicated to augmentative and alternative communication, all things related to helping kids with complex communication needs.
If you have a passion for helping people with language disabilities, this is the show for you. Each episode features an interview or a roundtable discussion on a topic related to augmentative communication and helping people with language disabilities.
And we're really passionate about giving practical strategies to clinicians working in the field who are working with children or adults, anything related to AAC.
So you can look us up on iTunes, or you can find us on Facebook. We got a group over there, or check out our website at bit.ly/TWT podcast.
Please join our community of professionals that are working to ensure that everyone can say whatever they want to say, however they want to say it.
Please listen carefully.
What is communication?
An essential behavior of life. We have the both blessing and responsibility of trying to foster another.
It's the strongest way for two people to convey information to each other.
Communication is a lifeline.
It's just connection with other people.
Connecting people in terms of ideas, thoughts, or needs.
Draws us out of ourselves, draws us into that relationship, builds up our families. Without it, we'd be lost.
Whatever it is that we do to express intent and achieve an impact.
Communication is the ability to express your needs, wants, frustrations, and desires to anyone that you feel needs to have that information.
Welcome to Speech Science episode 84. We are proud members of the Exceptional Podcast Network. I'm your host, Matt Hott, joined, as always, by Michael McLeod.
What's up, buddy?
Michael, 2 weeks in a row, buddy. Welcome back.
Yeah, it feels good. It's good to see you, man.
And joining us for the first time in 7 weeks, Michelle Wintering.
7 weeks, yikes! That sounds sad.
Yeah,
how's it going?
I'm good. We talked about it last week. Between illness and everyone going away, it's been a long time since the three of us have been together.
It's so nice to see your faces again and hear your voices, because I know our listeners can't see your beautiful faces.
Yeah, that would be weird if you could see us through the podcast. We could put our faces on the show art.
Do it.
I would like that.
Would you really?
It. Why not?
I'm too fat. I don't want my face on any show art.
No, I want like an animated version of it.
Oh, no. Well, no, we did that before. I do not want to go back that way.
I need to see this. Is it that sad?
Let's do that.
It is.
Let's do that face app thing where we look old.
Oh, no. I don't want to do any of that face app thing where we looked old. I don't want to get punked by Russia.
I know. We're giving our data away to everyone.
I don't want to do that.
It's just our fat faces.
Oh, my gosh. Anyways.
We're off to a great start with all three of us.
We want to hear from you. Head over to our website, speechsciencepodcast.com. That'll take you directly to our friends over at the XPN Network. You can also find us over on patreon.com, patreon.com/speechsciencepodcast. Up there, we are still doing the giveaway that if you are one of the higher donors, we will meet you, or at least I will meet you. I don't know if you guys are going to Disney yet. At ASHA, I'll take you out to dinner. How's that sound?
A free date with Matt Hott.
Yeah, with my kids.
Not bad.
My kids are going to ASHA. Also, you can email us, speechsciencepodcast@gmail.com, and hit us up on our phone number, 614-681-1798. Did you guys see that argument on Facebook the other day about kids at ASHA?
I did. I saw it. I saw it.
So ASHA put out a thing that said, hey, there's no daycare at ASHA. Also, please don't bring your children to ASHA into this professional CEU environment.
I'm guessing that happened?
People lost their minds. They're like, how can we not bring our held infant newborns into therapy educational programs? And like, I might have been the only one that was like, why would you bring your kids to ASHA?
I mean, I think they're meaning like a nursing or a carried baby. Is that different? Or was
they're saying like you can't. They said you can't bring that, and you can't bring your 10-year-old ragamuffin playing on his Nintendo Switch while I'm trying to figure out the difference between Pabst Beer Valve and something else.
I guess my question was, did that happen at the last ASHA? Were there a lot of kids and it was a problem?
No.
Because I don't remember seeing kids at the last ASHA.
At Denver, I saw kids.
I think maybe one. I remember seeing one person carrying a baby.
If I was a kid and my mom or dad brought me to ASHA, I would be pissed. I would not want to listen to that stuff.
Right? Like, hey, Mom, I'm going to go with you to the conference. Hey, Dad, I can't wait to listen. What are we learning about? The efficacy of board maker.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this was a whole debate on a Facebook group?
Yeah, basically saying that ASHA should let people bring their kids or at least have a daycare center set up for their kids to be at, I guess.
That would take
Like
a
an
lot
ASHA camp?
wow.
I guess they did it in the past, but
those SLP Facebook groups are good for at least one crazy argument per month.
One?
He said at least one. He did say at least one.
It's something just out of the ordinary.
I have never typed so much stuff that I've deleted.
You always comment.
I do, and then I'm like, why did I do that?
I always see you.
And I
always
get
look
the
down, and I see Matthew Hott. Don't bring your kids, you fools.
And the the Facebook algorithm pulls up what your friends post first.
Right.
So, I always see Matt's comments.
Well, there's a cartoon that was a couple years ago, like a little meme on the internet, and it said, "I can't go to bed now. Somebody is wrong on the internet," and that is me to a T.
Yep.
Where I'm like, and my problem is in all these Facebook groups, and I apologize to everybody in these Facebook groups.
I almost snorted when you said
I know.
that. I'm sorry.
Like, I apologize ahead of time to everyone in the Facebook groups because internally I'm like, oh, I've got the most rational response to the world to this. Typey, send. And then everyone's like, you're an idiot. Stop talking. And I'm like, well, this is why. And I'm like, why am I doing this to myself?
I've missed you guys. This is great.
Just so you all know, his name is Matthew Hott with 2 T's. His picture is him holding his 2 kids.
Yeah, it is. I'm in way too many Facebook groups.
Send him a message. I'm sure he's pissed you off or your friends.
Probably have. Thinking of things that might not upset you on today's episode, we are going to talk about what Sesame Street is doing with the Ad Council on a new round of PSAs. Also, ABA therapy. Is it abuse? Or is it useful for nonverbal students? We'll talk a little bit about that. And also the bidirectional interference between simulated driving and speaking. That's where Michael will tell us, can you do 2 things at once or does it affect you? But I thought we'd start off with an article out at healthday.com. It talks a little bit about how extreme eating habits could be an early cue to autism. And I know there's a lot of things that we look for in autism. How important is it to find, or at least look for these clues and maybe try to help get an early diagnosis for our students or for our children?
I know that feeding is a question that comes into any that I'm aware of, and I was on an ADOS team in Colorado too. The topic of feeding and food aversions and picky eating, in quotes there, comes up at every eval that we were in. And in part just to ask those questions, because I don't know what the research is showing, but this article is saying that, what was the numbers? It said
7 times more likely.
I think it said 15 times.
Did it say 15?
15 times the
atypical
rate
behaviors. Okay, I'm sorry.
typically found in children. Yeah. So atypical eating behaviors such as hypersensitivity to food textures or pocketing food without swallowing is found in 70% of kids with an autism diagnosis. And I mean, 15 times the rate. That I like that there's some research behind this now, because before I felt like it's, and I want to read this article, like find the background article on it. But before I felt like it was very anecdotal I talked to therapists who say, well, every kid that I worked with autism, had this issue, which is hard to make that generalization, right? But I've also worked with parents who've said, oh, when I ask them, tell me about their eating, and they say, oh, they eat what every kid with autism eats, that kind of phrase. So I think
not helpful.
Yeah, exactly. Like, give me more. But I think there is this anecdotal, experiential sort of like idea that atypical food habits come with autism. So I'd like to see more data like this to say, what do we know about it?
No, I didn't realize there was a link at all until I started working in a preschool. This was a couple years ago, and sitting at the preschool feeding table at like snack time and watching the OTs work on sensory integration for the slimy grapes or the crunchy carrots or the lukewarm whatever it was at the snack time. I never even realized that a lot of kids that are picky eaters at that age are also on the autism spectrum. I just kind of assumed it was a quirk at the high school age that I had previously worked with. I guess I sound unintelligent when it comes to that, but I just didn't even realize it until I did my tour of duty in the preschool.
Well, if you think about it, that rejection, the rejection of foods, is one of the earliest forms of communication. They're having that rejection. Yeah. They're having that negative experience with the food, and they're also showing pretty much an extreme rigidity. They find one thing that works and they stick with it, which is something that you tend to see, obviously not in all individuals with autism, but with autism, you tend to see that rigidity and that incredibly narrow comfort zone that they kind of stick with. So obviously feeding is something that is done from birth. So this is one of the earliest signs of that rigidity, as well as that very minimal communication skill.
I never even thought about it like that, as the rejection as an early communication.
Yep.
I do think it goes, you mentioned the early communication. That reminds me of the interview I did with Mel Potok, the feeding specialist out of Denver. And she talks about feeding as a conversation, especially a young kid with their parent and the child, of making it non-stressful and making it enjoyable for both parties. Even if they do have aversions to certain foods. And then also the other kind of telltale sign that I thought of is the sensory piece of, when we talk of atypical feeding behaviors, we're often talking about they don't like certain textures or colors, or it's more about, it's not always taste. It's often they won't even taste it. Like, we're not even to that point yet. So we're talking about a sensory input, and it can be visual, it can be touch, it can be smell. And, if you have a kiddo with autism who is hypersensitive to one of those things, then food is going to be, an overload.
Makes sense. And that interview will actually be on air next week for us.
Which one?
The interview you had with the nutritionist?
Oh, no. Melanie Potok, the SLP, a while ago.
Okay. I'm sorry. The nutrition one.
But the dietitian, yes.
Dietitian one.
Martha, I interviewed a pediatric dietitian that we will be airing soon.
Nice.
I couldn't have messed up the sell for that one more times than if I tried.
It's all good. I can advertise. This is good. We can advertise for upcoming interviews.
We want to hear from you, though. What do you notice about feeding and autism in your setting or with your own children? Head over to our website, speechsciencepodcast.com. You can email us, speechsciencepodcast@gmail.com, or text us 614-681-1798. Or if you would like to interact with Michelle or Michael, it's #SSPod on Instagram and Twitter, right?
We have a Twitter now?
We have had a Twitter.
No, but we're using the Twitter. We had an Instagram and we didn't use it, remember?
I will give you the username and password. I'm in charge of the Twitter. It is Speech Science PC, Speech Science Podcast PC, or Speech Science PC. That's it.
Yeah, there you go.
Our next article is actually coming out of the Journal of Speech, Language, and Hearing Research. The title is Bidirectional Interference Between Simulated Driving and Speaking by Christopher Dromey and Kelsey Simmons. Basically, they looked at 3 groups, ages 20 to 30, 40 to 50, and 60 to 71 years old. The adults had to produce a monologue and complete a simulated driving task, which involved maintaining a constant speed and lane position on a freeway. And guess what? In all age groups, their ability to do them correctly decreased.
Look at that.
So I turned to the executive functioning expert, Michael McLeod, who has a wonderful practice in Philadelphia. Why does that happen?
Well, I when I was reading this, I pretty much thought this was pretty obvious. I thought it was obvious that these two issues would happen. Pretty much when you're talking about executive functioning and performance, especially with these two things. So what was it? Driving and speaking?
Mm-hmm. Doing a monologue and driving.
Yeah, doing a monologue and driving. So pretty much the best way to think about this is to think about your executive functioning, your ability to be productive, your ability to perform. One of the best ways to think about it is like a RAM of a computer. So how much information can it take in? How much performance can it do before it crashes? So right here, you're doing driving and you're doing a monologue, and it's pretty much overload. So you're going to have some sort of instance where the performance is going to decrease because you are exerting two separate areas of performance at once, and you're overtaxing that frontal lobe of the brain.
So my dumb question, as I'm driving down the highway looking at Facebook on my phone, is the same thing happening then as I'm driving?
Absolutely. If you're looking at Facebook on your phone, you're not driving.
Which I don't, by the way, just facetiously saying.
Then why was that the example?
I see it as I drive. No, but like in reality, I do drive all day, and I see people like on their phones, and I've even given verbal notes in my phone while driving between patients.
Of course. If you're super focused and you're driving and you have your hands at 10 and 2 and you're focused and you're really thinking, you're driving fairly well. You're not using too much gas. You're not slamming on the brakes. You're paying attention to the lane you're in. You're paying attention to the drivers around you. Fine. If you're driving bored and your mind is racing and you're thinking about all sorts of things besides the road around you, you're not going to perform as well as a driver. But if you're on your phone and your brain is taking in information from your phone or whatever it may be, your driving performance, while it may be still fine, you may be driving perfectly fine, it won't be as good as if you were focusing your sole attention on driving.
I bet that there are even more studies that could come or maybe will come from this, because my brain's kind of running thinking, we talk about dual tasking or divided attention. If you're driving, I've heard it compared to hypnosis, right? Where you're driving a route you always drive from home to work to home, whatever that route is that you kind of zone out, right? So I wonder if you were driving a route that you zone out on normally, if you would be able to do that verbal task better. I'm not saying you're driving better, just saying you're on autopilot. And then secondly, if you because if you're on an unfamiliar route, or all of us have probably done it, where you're driving and the weather gets really bad, it's raining, or you're not sure where you are, we turn the radio down, or we turn it off, or we stop other input so that we can figure out what's going on or focus on the road more. And we do it without even thinking. Like we drop the stimuli so that we can focus on one task instead of dual tasking.
Which kind of brings me to what I do with some of my home care patients and even some of my high school students that I would work with on some cognition stuff or executive functioning, is that if they start to do real well, I'll start to play music like during therapy settings, just to, I guess, in my brain, I'm trying to make it a little bit more difficult for them to concentrate. And I realize that during my own therapy, that if it's music that they enjoy, they actually do worse because they're actually paying attention to it. Where if it's music that they don't enjoy, they almost block it out and do the task as accurately as they were doing it before.
Yeah, that makes that makes perfect sense. When you're listening to music you enjoy and you're focusing on it, that's activating those specific parts of the brain. That reminds me of when they provide Alzheimer's and dementia patients with music from their time to kind of get them energized and to bring back some memories and things like that. And that's really what you're doing there, is you're playing music to get them focused on that and to bring them back to that. But your task is to kind of make it, it's almost like playing white noise in the background to see if you can still perform. That's kind of like what you're describing. And that's really what it is when you have that extra auditory feedback or that extra input coming into the brain, performing other tasks will be difficult.
I have a therapy question then for the both of you guys, and maybe it's just a rhetorical thought question, but are we wasting our time then when we look at working on a cognition or an executive functioning skill in isolation? I mean, if we're looking at, like, I work with adults that post-stroke in the home care setting. And if we know that realistically they're never going to work on a task in isolation, should I be spending more time at an earlier stage with a distraction for a split attention task? So if I'm doing an organizational task, should I already have music or TV or a YouTube clip playing early on in therapy instead of waiting for them to conquer the task individually and then move to distraction.
That is certainly a goal. You certainly want therapy to get to that point. In the beginning, you have to focus on several other things before you get to that point. That's almost like working with like an early intervention style student, and you're working on the last pieces of the goal before it's finally mastered.
I gotcha.
So with executive functioning, the way you're talking about it, if they're able to perform the executive function task with therapist created distractions, that's really right on the verge of mastering that skill. Full mastery of executive function skill has to happen in the true environment where it's happening. So you're going to need a parent report, a teacher report, or you're going to have to observe, or there's going to have to be something. There's no standardized test. There's nothing to show it. You pretty much need to master that skill in the environment. And that's really a prelude. That's what you're describing is the prelude to that. It's the therapist created environment. And then after that, they master that. They're mastering it in the true environment over time, in high frequency, as reported by the people who are around them, to show that that skill has been achieved.
Michelle, you look like you were going to say something before, but I didn't want to cut you off before.
Oh, no, I liked listening to what Mike says, and I like the idea of building on it, because we do that. We stair step things all the time. So it makes sense to me to do the task in an isolated format where they can master it, just like we do articulation and isolation first, before we build to phrases and words, or words and phrases, and we do syllables and then words and then phrases. So it makes sense to build and layer our therapy.
Exactly. It's like a social pragmatic goal for a very young kid. Basically, they have to master the conversation initiation with you, the circles of communication back and forth, the topic maintenance with the clinician first, and then you're going to want to observe them in the classroom using those exact same skills they used with you with their same aged peers. It's pretty much, if I could compare it to any true speech and language goal, I would compare it to that.
Makes sense to me. We want to hear from you. Head over to our website, speechsciencepodcast.com. Let us know where we got it right, what we got wrong. You can email us speechsciencepodcast@gmail.com, or phone call or text message 614-681-1798. Coming up after the break, we're going to talk a little bit of Sesame Street and their new deal with the Ad Council, and also ABA therapy. Is it abuse? We'll come right back. You're listening to Speech Science.
Do you have an idea for a product or book? Or are you ready to go beyond in-service presentations? Well, how do you get started? And what if you don't have any business experience at all? Well, I have some great news for you. I'm Mei-Ling Chan, and I'm getting the nitty-gritty stories from parents, teachers, therapist advocates, and people with disabilities who have created successful businesses, and they're sharing their intimate stories with you. Listen to us on the Exceptional Leaders Podcast and fast-track creating and building and sharing your idea with the world so that you can help more people.
Welcome back to Speech Science, episode 85. Matt Hott, joined as always by Michelle Wintering.
Hi, Matt.
Hi, and Michael McLeod.
What's up?
What up? All right, our next article is coming out of Taylor Francis Online. It's Cogent. How do I say that?
Cognate.
Cogent.
Cogent.
Thank you. Cogent Psychology. It's by Eileen Herlinda Sandoval Norton and Gary Shikidi, along with Jacqueline Ann Rushby, the reviewing editor. It says, how much compliance is too much compliance? Is long-term ABA therapy abuse? And they go into a lot of details about ABA therapy. It says autism's relevance and prevalence is slowly creeping to the forefront of modern day medication. Our medicine, ABA, is a form of behavior modification that relies heavily on external reinforcements, both positive and negative, aka operant conditioning. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of this article, because this is the big one this week, what are your guys' initial reactions to ABA therapy?
From my experiences, and I'm someone who's trained and consistently uses the DIR floor time approach. One of the main things that this article really highlights is honestly some of the negative things about ABA, and how a lot of the research is showing that it is teaching children some sort of negative compliance, learned helplessness, a food reward obsession, and it tends to magnify vulnerabilities, low self-esteem, decreased internal motivation, which is huge for communication, and decreased interpersonal skills, and increased anxiety as well. And of course that prompt dependency. These are all things that I've certainly observed, and I've certainly believed about ABA. And I think this article really highlights those things.
I think on my end, I'm thinking more of the families I've worked with young children, and I've had families say, you know, ABA has made a world of difference. Our kid can finally do things they were never able to do. But then I've also had parents sit in an evaluation and say what Mike said, that they, you know, their child is averse to certain types of food because it was paired with that ABA prompting so much when they try to do ABA for a year or so. So I feel like I need to learn more about both. I want to learn more about the DIR floor time model and more about ABA, because I've had parents ask what my recommendation is, and I have a hard time giving them a strong recommendation just because I don't personally know enough about both.
When I hear the arguments for ABA, I instantly go back to what I learned in leveling courses about Chomsky versus Skinner. Are you guys remember those lessons?
Psychology,
and stuff,
yep.
Where like Skinner was saying that it's an innate language. Chomsky was saying that it's an innate language, that we are naturally drawn to creating language with input from the outside, or with external input. And Skinner says that it's all behavioral modification in a way, that when we say mama, it's because the lady turns and gives us food. So we go, oh my gosh, that must mean mama. And I hear about that from ABA, and I've worked with a couple ABA therapists. I don't see if ABA is done ethically and correctly. I think, at least the way I see it is correctly, I don't see it as abuse. I think, however, there's a lot of people that rely in the ABA realm, rely too much on that operant conditioning. And like Michael said, they become reliant on food. This is tough because I've worked with some good ABA therapists. I've gone to some ABA trainings at OSLA out here in Ohio. But I don't know, man. Like, I hear the horror stories, and now we've got articles being written by students or people with autism or autistics that have said ABA is abuse. I feel like I've been abused.
And I think that's what stood out in the article, is where they said, shockingly, the lack of research to describe the longitudinal side of it. Like, what we're getting the short-term effect of that, you know, cause and effect, and the response of the child to this prompt. My question with any ABA therapist that I've worked with who've come into a session with one of the kids I'm working with is, how are we moving beyond the prompting? Like, at what point do we drop the prompting and the pairing it with the reward? Because that, as an SLP, is our goal. Just like we talked about an article ago of how do we get the carryover? Where is true mastery? Because the therapy room or with the ABA therapist is not mastery.
Yep.
Yeah. And this article really, I liked how it states, basically, we do not yet understand the longitudinal effects of the entire generation that has undergone this treatment. And there's so many reasons, and if we want to dig deeper, there's so many reasons for that. And, you know, just being someone in this field, it's quite clear how insurances will fund these ABA therapies over physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy. So ABA is just one of those things that is just always funded, that insurances are always much more apt to fund. Pediatricians and whoever it may be will recommend this ABA. And you have an entire generation of kids, verbal, nonverbal, low functioning, high functioning, that are undergoing this treatment. And we yet do not understand the longitudinal effects of how is it improving overall quality of life. It certainly is rigid. I think anyone will admit that true ABA therapy is rigid, but it's really, it's always a matter of therapist and pairing with client and student. But it's definitely known that we do not know how this is affecting people and what is it doing over the long term, because ABA tends to be a multiple time a week, many hours a day thing. What is it doing and how is it affecting them? And this prompt dependency is simply just goes against what so much of what we learn as speech pathologists as we go through that graduate program of natural communication in a natural environment and responding to your peers and using your body language and expressive language and receptive language, everything pairing together in the circles of communication. There's no prompting there. There's no reward there. It's about increasing your internal intrinsic motivation and having these natural conversations.
I thought it was pretty jarring in the article. It says, quote, "In fact, future generations can compare this kind of abuse to the abuse we recognize in classic experiments and treatments from generations before us." That's deep. Not deep, but that hits hard to the core.
Strongly worded, yeah.
Because I don't know about you guys, but how many times have I worked with a student that is 4 or 5 years old, who I'm holding on to a Jenga brick, and he's screaming at me to want it, and I'm waiting for him to request it. Am I holding it too long because I was taught that we need to wait for him to state that thing? And when do we create too far into that realm of what ABA is doing for a negative reinforcement? I don't know. That's where my brain initially hits. I had a clinical supervisor once. They don't give it to him until he requests it. And there was a 5-minute scream fest until the student sat down and requested it. And it still gets to me today. Yeah. I think the rigidity of ABA is something that definitely needs to be addressed. And it really depends on the individual and where their training is. ABA therapists will always defend ABA and kind of not agree with the speech therapy. And, I've worked with PTs that, as someone who specializes in ADHD, I've worked with PTs who specialize in sensory and say, oh, ADHD is not a real diagnosis. It's really always sensory. It's always this. Everybody has their own philosophies. There's no one size fits all. This is the way it is. We have to look at what are the programs, what is the education, what is the curriculum, what are the experiences, how easy and how simple and are these people able to get certified and become therapists, and really, learning different viewpoints and having different experiences. This is tough, man. This is one of those landmine articles that if you like ABA, what we're saying, it doesn't make sense to you. And if you hate ABA, what we're saying is the truth gospel spoken by Chomsky himself.
Well, and have either of you, I haven't experienced or seen, and like I said, I'm not an ABA expert by any means, but in the article that was kind of jarring for me were some of the consequences, I guess you would call it, of various punishments, such as, this is a quote from the article, misting the child on the face with water, taking away desired objects, withholding attention, ignoring the child, removing them from the situation, and even electric shock have all been utilized. And it's quoted in some research there. I haven't seen that side of prompt consequence with ABA, but I'm curious if either of you have seen. more
I have not.
extreme.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. And I would consider that to be something.
Abuse?
Yeah.
Like that's straight up abuse to me. That's not.
That's got to be like 30, 40 years ago.
Okay.
That can't be. That cannot possibly be.
Right, because that doesn't make sense to me. I mean, removing them from a situation or withholding an object, that's one thing. But yeah, anyways, sorry.
Well, no, I was saying, like, I've worked with an ABA teacher, and she was great. She stayed in her lane of ABA, and I think that is a completely different discussion for a different show about the scope of practice for ABA.
Mm-hmm.
But she stayed in her lane, I stayed in my lane, and we worked together. And we had a mutual understanding that I was concerned about the building blocks of language for the students, and she was concerned about the behavior that they were presenting. And she looked to me to talk about what she was seeing in the classroom and how can we form that into language. And I was telling her about what I saw language deficits and asked her what they would look like in the classroom for behavioral outbursts. And, you know, for example, I know it talks about toilet training. One of the things that she worked with her student on was that every time he pulled I need to use the bathroom card out of the book, it didn't matter what time of day it was or during the classroom. It didn't matter if he just got back. She or the aide took the student right to the bathroom. And it was every time he pulled a card off of his PECS book that, or not PECS book, but you know what I mean, visual exchange book, that she was reinforcing that idea. And every time that there was a behavioral that needed to be modified, it was never like spraying the kid in the face. It was more trying to redirect into a positive with language. So my experience with ABA is completely different than what some of these people are saying that's out there that we've read about in those Facebook groups we talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm. And I've worked with a couple of BCBAs, and I'm thinking specifically when I was in the therapy camp setting, who were awesome. So this is a jarring article for me because I don't know that other side of it that other people are experiencing. But then I'm with you, Matt, of trying to figure out how much withholding of something is okay and how much is too much.
Mike, we look to you as the executive functioning expert to tell us, are we in the wrong?
No.
Because we're not spraying the children or electrocuting them, right?
Well, geez. My gosh.
I mean, when you put it that way, that is abuse. Like, no.
Clearly, yeah.
I think if something like DIR or other differing viewpoints, I'm once again, I was just talking about bias. I'm trained in DIR and I love DIR. So there you go. But I think if other things were able to be paid for by insurance as easily as ABA, I think once again, it always comes down to money. It always comes down to money. It always comes down to funding, just like everything does. If a differing viewpoint from ABA were more easily accessible, even something like a music therapy or an art therapy, something, I think we would start to see benefits being had in other areas besides the ABA protocol.
Well, and I think you're onto something there because I hadn't heard of DIR floor time until the last 2 years.
Exactly.
That was not a term that I was familiar with, but the vast majority of, even non-SLPs and non-special ed folks have heard of ABA.
Exactly.
One of the links from the article, it says research has consistently found that individuals respond to the prompts instead of to the cues that are expected to evoke a target behavior, ultimately contributing to learned helplessness and arguably to low self-esteem. And that explains why intensive conditioning in nonverbal children rarely generalizes to other tasks.
There you have it.
So we want to hear from you. Head over to our website, weigh in on the ABA versus SLP fight. Go to our website, speechsciencepodcast.com. You can email us speechsciencepodcast@gmail.com or give us a phone call, 614-681-1798. Or if they would love to interact with us socially, how do they do that?
Instagram at speech_science.
Hashtag SS pod.
There you go.
I love it. Our last article is a little bit about autism still, but more about what we're doing to raise awareness. And I'm going to play a short clip here from the PSA Central. It's out of the Ad Council. We are full members of the Ad Council, and you'll notice those play between the shows. Here is a quick look at Julia from Sesame Street.
What is it, Julia? Why are you so excited, honey? Hey, do you want to use your talker? With Julia's autism, using a talker can help her find the words she wants to say.
My dog.
You want to do something with Rose, Julia?
Play ball.
Do you want to play catch with Rose? I think Rose is excited to play catch too. Oh, Julia, you show us so many different ways to talk together. Oh, and play. Good catch, Rose. Okay, give Julia the ball. There you go. Okay, throw the ball, Julia.
Whoa. For Julia's family, early screening for autism made a lifetime of difference. Find out more at screenforautism.org.
Okay, Julia, there you go. Whoa, another good throw. That's the way.
So that's made possible through Autism Speak, Sesame Street, and the Ad Council, which we are full members of. That's why we are allowed to play that whole clip. I love it. I love that Sesame Street has introduced Julia. I love that before my son even goes to school, he's introduced to my 6-year-old. He's introduced to topics such as this. Last week, Michael, we talked about the little girl in Toy Story with the cochlear implant. She's on screen for like 2 seconds. But I love that Sesame Street is using themselves for what they have always done, which was to show inclusion and educate.
Exactly. Educate and expose. And there was absolutely nothing like this when we were kids. And the fact, and that's really all it is kids are now able to see that. Even just 2 years ago, when I would introduce a talker to some of my students, they would walk back into the classroom and all the other kids, oh, what's that? What's that? Is that an iPad? Is that an iPad? And it's difficult for the kid and it's anxiety producing. So now if kids can know, oh, that's his iPad, that's for his communication, that's his talker. It's not an iPad, it's his talker or her talker. I think that could really go a long way. And that's really all what it's all about is exposure and getting it out there and giving everybody a fair shot.
I think it's great too. And I was thinking of Sesame Street with, I have a longer commute now for work. I started back to work, as you guys know, and I've been listening to some different podcasts, and there's one that is a dual thing with Sesame Street about parenting tips. And they talk about this whole developmental team. I'm like, I want to go work for Sesame Street. Can I do that? But they have this developmental team that, you know, every word that is said on Sesame Street is run by this team of child development experts. And I love it, just like you said, Mike and Matt, that it's showing kids, it's giving them that little bit of exposure, even if they can't have it in person if there's not a kid next door or a sibling or a cousin or a friend or whoever else, they're getting it through something as simple as Sesame Street's ad or TV show.
Sesame Street has been killing it, I guess I can say that. If you're not familiar with the history of Sesame Street, recently within the last year or 12 or 24 months, it moved over to HBO. HBO is now in charge of producing new episodes of Sesame Street. Since then, they've introduced Julia. They've introduced a foster care puppet. And also they have been the first TV show to be honored at the Kennedy Center Awards. So
pretty cool stuff.
Pretty cool.
And because it's on HBO now, they can curse.
That's part of the child development.
That's right.
As long as they're using it appropriately.
Exposure to language.
As long as they're using it appropriately.
That's right.
All right. Well, that is a fun way to end. So we want to hear from you. Head over to our website, speechsciencepodcast.com, or email us speechsciencepodcast@gmail.com. Phone call or text message 614-681-1798. Don't do it while we're driving. We learned earlier today that may be a recipe for disaster. Michelle, what are you doing this next week?
Oh my goodness, I feel like I have so much to update you on in the last 2 months. No, I am back to work doing outpatient pediatrics here in Kentucky. And my son, Baby Speech Science, turned 1 year old on the 4th of July.
Hey, happy birthday.
Thank you. He's unfortunately, the week of his birthday, had croup, that terrible, terrible barking seal cough that they wake up with overnight. And thankfully, he's doing so much better. He has more personality than we know what to do with. And even though he's not saying a whole lot of words, he communicates very well at the moment with what he wants or doesn't want. And
nice.
Yeah, we're doing well.
Michael, what is going on with you this next week?
Pretty much just continuing what I've been doing. Have a big evaluation coming up. It's going to take a few, maybe even take place over a couple of days. Always prepping for some big evals over the summer. Getting everything prepared with some of my schools and some of my families for the upcoming school year. Always meeting new families as well, which is always awesome. One of my favorite things. So yeah, just kind of continuing and preparing for September as we always are.
For myself, I am enjoying the end of my summer. I've got a couple trainings at the new school district. This weekend, probably a couple days after this episode hits, I'm dropping the computer off at Micro Center and hoping to get it updated, and then going out to Kokomo, Indiana, the birthplace of the Kokomo Beach Boys song, because they've got one of the largest vintage, antique, and current toy collections in the Midwest. And I'm going to go spend money on colorful plastic that gets to sit on my shelves and give some to my children.
I was like, do you get to play with it?
So if you look behind me, which you cannot, I just bought a street scene that my wife questions about, so I could put my action figures on the shelf and it looks like they're fighting at a building.
Very cool, Matt.
Wow.
Yep. I'm a nerd, and that is okay with me.
I like it. It's the little things.
Oh, man, you have no idea. And hang on. All right, cool. 3, 2, 1. You have no idea. You should feel bad for my wife because she is raising 3 children at this point. So make sure you head over to our website, speechsciencepodcast.com. We want to hear from you. And in the immortal words of Janice Wright, always be a willow, because the oak will crack in the storm, the willow will bend and return to form. Our intro music tonight is Please Listen Carefully by Jazar. It's licensed under an attribution and share alike license. Our bump music is The County Fair Rock by John Deku. He's pretty cool because he's married to an SLP and he made music just for our show. You can find him over at soundcloud.com/dirtdogmusic. And our closing music is The Slow Burn by Kevin MacLeod. It's licensed under a Creative Commons attribution license. For Michelle Wintering and Michael MacLeod, I'm Matt Hott, going to go to Kokomo this weekend. We'll see you next week. So long, everybody.
Are you going to play a little clip of that song for us?
Which one?
Kokomo.
No, I can't. We don't have the rights to that.
You can play it. We can play like 5 seconds.
Yeah, right? No.
This has been an Exceptional Podcast Network production. Speech Science is edited and produced by MWH Production. Please follow Speech Science on Twitter at SpeechSciencePC and like our page on Facebook. For more original podcasts, please visit exceptionaled.com and rate and subscribe to our podcast anywhere you get your podcasts.